Arlie, we
Oh, go
can
ahead.
zoom in on that crowd.
I was just going to say, I'm new to this. This is my first time being a chief scientist for a deep sea expedition like this. And so I definitely have the same language in my dive plans where I am deferring to the expertise of the pilots, the navigators, and Nicole Renault, the expedition lead. So I was open and all ears for all the suggestions about how to properly transit between waypoints or throw away waypoints altogether.
That is the hallmark of wisdom. Now, we have a few more questions, if you don't mind, and I hope I'm not distracting you all while you're exploring here, but thank you for answering
Okay,
James's
we can zoom
question.
out.
Now, Mariah wants to know, how deep do organisms live into the sediment, and are the sampling protocols different if you're looking, for example, to do genome studies versus morphological studies?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you have any idea about infaunal organisms, Laura?
It's definitely not my area of expertise, no. Sorry.
Um, gosh, that our pilots or anyone else on? Steve, Sam, do you have an idea about how deep infaunal organisms live?
Yeah, typically, we do this quite often. We'll take a core, and that allows us to see some of the bioturbation of the surface layer of the sediment. Most of the time you see worm tubes and things, at most maybe a few centimeters deep. It really depends on how solid the layers are. At one point you'll reach some pretty dense clay-like material, and it won't be so soft and fluffy anymore. You rarely find megafauna, or you may find myofauna, I'm not sure, below those layers, but it's really dependent on how compacted the sediment is. Um, the infauna will really only live in the top couple centimeters because you also have to deal with, sometimes you're in rather low oxygenated waters, in which case, going deeper into the sediment may not be an advantageous strategy for life. But the second part of that question was something about genomic versus morphological analyses. And a lot of the times, it depends on what the scientist's goals are. We have, for example, if we're trying to do transcriptomic analyses, or working on very sensitive genomic material, we may want to do seafloor preservations. We've done things like preserving organisms that we've collected in RNA later on the seafloor. So it essentially preserves their, you know, DNA and RNA for later analysis. That could be in something like, you know, pulling a pulling a quiver full of RNA later down to the seafloor, sticking in your organism, and then capping it so that it doesn't mix with the seawater. That's worked pretty well in the past. But if that's not such a big deal, we can also just collect the specimen, keep it cold in a box, and one of the bio boxes, they hold temperature pretty well, and preserve it, freeze it, flash freeze it as soon as it gets to the surface. It really just depends on what the scientist's goals are.
Arlie, can we zoom in on that?
Thank you all. Those are great. While you're all setting up to Zoom, I wanted to just add that,
Looks
it's
like
a good question,
carbon.
Mariah, about genomic
Okay,
extraction versus
we can
other
zoom out.
studies, like morphological studies. Um, those those are not mutually exclusive. In other words, as we've begun to look at taxonomy through the lens of genomics, like phylogenomics, we begin to realize that there's a lot of value in doing
We
both the
can zoom in
genomics
on
and the
this one
more
too.
traditional taxonomic work, because they do go hand in hand. So we try to preserve, in general, if we're looking for something new or we're trying to take a representative sample, we try to preserve for both, if possible.
Yeah, so it looks like we
Yeah,
have a rock here with a
that's.
black coral, or two black corals. They look like
Mm,
possibly umbellapathes, which are the pink kind of bending stalks, and then a couple primnoids of some type. They look similar to the ones that we've collected, although it's much smaller. So possibly Calyptrophora, but any tighter zoom on that, those white branches?
What do you think? Is that a sponge in the bottom left, Steve?
Yeah,
that's
that
full
looks some
zoom, Steve.
encrusting sponge. You can see here, this is actually a really good
I
example.
can go get closer.
If you can.
Okay, can you zoom out for a second?
This is a really good example of the value of hard substrate in a muddy expanse of seafloor. You can see how well colonized and how densely colonized these hard rocky substrates are versus the surrounding seafloor. At times, a lot of these deep water corals and sponges, all they need is a small pebble or something to satisfy their attachment to the seafloor, and it looks like they're growing out of the soft sediment, but they're just on a very small rock. But of course, the larger boulders also provide stability. Something that's this size is not
Marla,
going to topple over as you start to accumulate mass on a coral, for example.
You
But eventually the coral will grow large enough that it could potentially influence the substrate and tip over.
come here.
All right, that's full zoom.
All right, I got some good captures there.
Okay. Current's wanting to
Yeah,
turn me
I
into
wonder.
it. Okay.
Do you think that's an Asbestipluma on the that was the upper left? So fuzzy. It didn't look like a coral, but it was fuzzy, and there's one branch coming off of it.
They, yeah, I see what you're talking about now. No, I think you know what that is. It's also a black coral. I can see some fine branching at the terminal end. We have three of these.
You can zoom in again.
I think it's Umbellapathes. It has that branching pattern. So yeah, that's a black coral. You got two younger ones and then one older one, or larger one.
Yeah.
And then you've got a bunch of these white primnoids.
Some picnic-eyed legs.
What about the sort of fan-shaped? Is that a worm? The fan-shaped thing coming out of a tube there?
Yeah, it looks like some sort of serpulid polycute worm.
Kind of precariously. Okay, zoom out.
Thank you.
Get going.
Yeah, I'm going to let you catch up before putting in another move. Well, yeah.
We have Guy Cochran in the science chat saying commenting on this rock. Where did it come from? Kelp floating or kelp rafting? There must be an upslope source where these rocks are coming from.
That was cool. Thank you all. Now, Seth in the class wants to ask a question about sound. He's saying, is this ROV equipped with a hydrophone to record, soniferous organisms or organisms making sound that's outside the bandwidth of the sound produced by the ROV? In other words, can you hear critters around you?
So we don't have a permanent hydrophone on here. We have deployed hydrophones, and mostly they're independent instruments that you'd set down on the seafloor, and we get away from them because we're so loud. So, and they just record the sounds. We come back later and pick them up. So we've definitely done that sort of work. I couldn't tell you.
Thank you.
What the science was there.
There was, we deployed some in 2017 around a cold seep, actually methane bubbling out of the seafloor up off the Olympic coast.
Can we zoom in on that?
That was the last time I remember deploying one of those. I think they were trying
I forgot about that.
Yeah, determine if seeps make sound or maybe the seep organisms make any sound.
They did, and they published a paper on that talking about the sound emitted through underwater bubbling, which should make a sound, and they were using it as a way of estimating gas flux.
Yep.
Huh.
For our viewers at home, those little green dots there are lasers. How far apart are they?
They're 10 centimeters.
So that gives you a sense of how big these different organisms are that we're looking at.
Okay, zoom out. I gotta zip ahead a bit. Seems like we're seeing more rocks here and more life.
Yeah, I
coming
just
up
posed.
from above.
Yeah, I just posed this question to Guy. I'm wondering for our next move, once we've completed this ship move, if we should just turn up slope to see if we can find the source, or if we should keep going along slope.
Oh, we got another can. Those people were asking if you find these things.
Yep, some evidence of human impacts right here.
I wonder if it's a vintage can, like
We
you were
zoom in on that?
earlier.
It's pretty vintage to me.
Vintage
It's
Coke
Fanta.
Fanta. Vintage Fanta.
You're sounding so excited. Oh, there's a hole in it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. We got some Fanta lovers down here.
Huh.
So I don't think
Actually,
that's
looks like
that vintage because of the shape of the
Oh,
bottom.
yeah,
I
you're
think
right.
it's
Right, right.
yeah.
They did start making some of their patterns look more vintage. Hard to determine when it's
Oh,
on the
yeah.
seafloor.
The retro Fanta.
Retro design, yeah.
Now,
Okay,
do you
zoom
think
out.
that like, do you think that the kind of there are more soda cans on the seafloor from crappier sodas than good sodas?
Sounds like a paper.
Well, I can tell you for sure that there's a lot more wine bottles and champagne bottles in the Caribbean from what I've seen than soda cans. Maybe it's all the cruise ships. It seems to be
Yeah,
like the
that's
number
a good
one
point.
bottle that we see in that area.
Higher
Steve,
end
correct me if
clientele.
I'm wrong. I think that there is a zone away from shore in which you're allowed to throw glass over the side. I mean, I know there's like, I just think that it's just to bring everyone in the class up to speed that there's certain things you can dump overboard depending on your distance from shore. And I think that glass sort of shows up sooner. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that's changed, and I don't think you can dump
Really?
anything anymore. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, man.
We don't dump
Oh,
anything.
I think you're right.
Yeah, we don't dump anything anymore. Yeah, back in the day, you could throw a lot of stuff, but never plastic. That was always verboten. But
Yeah.
I think you can't throw anything overboard anymore. But it was different miles from shore limits for the type of things you could throw overboard.
Yeah, thanks for jogging my memory. Yeah, that's right. They stopped that. It must have been about 10 years or so, but obviously my brain is slow this morning. But yeah, there were these kind of thresholds, like you could toss whatever, just about anything if you were out far enough, and except plastic. And then as you got closer to shore, you had to sort your trash a bit more.
Nav, and I think we should continue along this contour as it kind of curves southward, because there looks to be like we're on trajectory within this contour to hit a bit of a higher slope once we go past 5H and follow kind of curved southward.
Alrighty. So heading southward in the same contour on the way to 5I, correct?
Yeah. So I was just following your mouse. That looked correct. We're just gonna stay in our lane.
Roger.
Within these contour lines, hoping we'll hit more slope later.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Folks, if it's not too much a bother, if any of you would like to tell us a bit about your journey to get to this place, because some of us have taken kind of not so straight journeys, it'd be great to hear about how it is you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go first, Laura?
Sure, yeah. I had my first really exposure to the ocean was when I was in Santa Barbara as a really young kid, an 11-year-old, and had the chance to go out to the Channel Islands and just was so seasick, but so enamored with everything that I saw. Some divers brought up just all kinds of nudibranchs and sharks in egg cases, and I was just blown away. But next year we moved to St. Louis, Missouri, and then Wisconsin, and kind of all over the country. It took me away from the ocean, and I always really wanted to go back. And I ended up doing doing my undergrad at UC Berkeley and doing a year abroad in Australia, and got to sort of reconnect with the marine biology, and came back and did worked at the Catalina Island Marine Institute, which is a camp for kids and school groups to get really kind of that same connection that I got when I was in 6th grade. Then applied to graduate school at UCSB and worked in deep sea biology. As I said earlier, Peter and I think I was a student just before he was in the Childress Lab, and loved the science, but really loved interpreting the science. And so went on to become a kelp forest diver with Channel Islands National Park, and then got the job at Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary doing education and outreach. So there were a few other curves along the way. I thought at one point I wanted to be a physical therapist and a doctor, but kind of came back to the marine biology path. And 26 years later, I'm still here, and I love my job. I feel really lucky what I get to do every day. Lizzie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's awesome, because I kind of had this somewhat similar experience. I'll start too. I from a young age, I lived in inland California, so in the Central Valley. I grew up near a town called Porterville, kind of north of Bakersfield, if anyone's familiar with that area. And so we were landlocked, and we had like one vacation a year, and we would always head to the coast. We'd always go to Cambria or Cayucas here in the Central California. And I just loved it. I was obsessed. We'd spend 3 or 4 nights, and just every single day, I would just want to go to the beach, and then I would look forward to it the next year. And I'm a first-generation college student, and so when I decided I want to go to college, I only applied to schools at the beach. My parents made me apply to a few inland too, but I obviously was not going to go to those. I ended up getting a scholarship to Long Beach State, and I went to school there. Turns out they had an amazing marine biology program. I can't say that I knew what I was doing, but I really lucked out that I ended up there because they have such a strong program. I took marine biology for undergraduates and just fell in love. Like, the labs were in tide pools. We'd go visit the marsh. We would go to the aquarium. I was just like, wow, I can't believe you can major in this. So then that was an obvious choice for me. And then I started volunteering for the Marine Lab, which was really just like feeding the animals there that were either for research projects or for the labs, the wet labs that we would have for upper division marine biology courses. And then through that, I started volunteering in research labs, because then I could go out into the field more. Is this a cliff?
Yeah, looks like we're coming into something.
Oh, it's exciting. More slopey, but that's okay. That's interesting. And so I started volunteering in some labs, and then I got some great mentors who encouraged me. Yeah, that's great. More corals, hopefully.
Can we zoom in on this guy?
So I got involved in some labs, and I got some great mentors who encouraged me to apply to graduate school, and I ended up staying at Cal State Long Beach for my graduate degree. And I was just doing intertidal work, intertidal ecology, and I applied for this internship that brought me all the way to Santa Barbara. I say all the way, it really wasn't that far. And I've been working for the Channel Islands ever since. So I've just been following the open doors, and I had an opportunity to coordinate this 4-year initiative because I had some coordinating experience under my hat already, and it just opened my world to the deep sea, and I couldn't be happier than it did. So I wasn't aiming to land here, but like you were saying, Peter, I just found my way here, and I'm really happy that this is kind of where I'm landing. I do multiple things, so this is probably half of my my job, and I do some other analyses on human uses within Channel Islands to try to get a handle on our visitors and the patterns over space and time of where they're going. But this is obviously way more interesting. So how about those that are on the Nautilus?
I could go.
Yes, please.
So I kind of stumbled into this job reading a trade magazine in '96. I was working as an engineer in San Diego, and I saw a job opening for Alvin pilot. So I went for it and didn't hear a thing. So had totally forgotten about that. And then a year after that, they called me up out of the blue and said the ship was in port. Could I come down and interview? And I ended up starting the next Monday. And now it's been a long time.
So, Bob, what kind of work did you do before that to build those skills that were useful for?
So ROV pilots and submarine pilots also have to be engineers, because you have to maintain the equipment and help develop new equipment. So they look for people who have engineering backgrounds. You don't necessarily have to have a degree, but you have to have good skills. So.
And how did you develop those skills?
Myself?
Yep.
I started as a little kid. My father bought me a 1001 electronics kit, and I built every single project in that thing, and then so I guess I've been doing electronics since I was 8 years old or so.
Nice.
That doesn't surprise me a bit, Robert. Robert's like damage control on board ships. So, and it's also true that, as Robert said, they take care of the vehicles, but many of those who maintain HOVs or ROVs, when they can, really give it their all to help the scientists, right? I mean, we should go out there prepared and have our backups and all that, but a lot of scientists show up and then they're like, here, I've got this widget and I can't make it work. And Robert and others step in and really work really hard to help the tools we bring to sea, work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, we have some soft grabbers. Do we have them on board right now? I think we do.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Funny you should mention that. I was about to bring it up.
So those guys right there, I can move the camera back a little bit. So that thing's in development, and we've sort of made a change to it now. We made it a 3-finger grabber instead of a 2-finger grabber. So that's something that's happened on board. Just by trying the thing out, we decided it needed a little tweaking. So that was a mod we did.
Check this out, Robert. That grabber is from the lab of a guy named Rob Wood here at Harvard. And at the time, Brennan Phillips, who was one of the ROV team members, was working here as a postdoc, if I remember correctly. And one of my students now, Grace Matthews, is an engineering student, and she works in Rob's lab. So earlier in the other watch, she caught a glimpse of that in the frame. She's like, whoa, I know that. I know that thing. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
We're working with Brennan on this, and actually, he's also sending out a new camera that he's been working on. So we're helping him evaluate that, and it's all just potted in epoxy. So it's a real low cost Raspberry Pi kind of camera, and so if that works out, maybe we can get like a panoramic front camera that doesn't cost much and really gives us a new view out the front. So he asked
for sure.
He bought us some materials for. I brought out a 3D printer this cruise, and he bought some materials for that 3D printer to print some really high-tech plastic. So we're thinking we can use that to make some, science tools and things on the fly while we're out here, and brackets for the ROV and stuff. I think having that on here is going to be a really handy thing to have.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'd love to. I'm going to stop talking because I'd love to hear from everybody else about their missions. But I hope the students who are listening in now are sort of noticing that there's actually quite so far. Just we've already heard a few different paths, but I don't know if anyone else would like to chime in and share a bit about their journey.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I'm a PhD engineering student at UC San Diego, and coincidentally, my advisor also did his postdoc at Rob Wood's lab as well. So yeah, I found Nautilus Live through the internship, and came out as an ROV intern last year and loved it, and came back this year.
Is this Paul?
Yeah, this is Paul.
I don't know that we've met in person, Paul, but it's nice to meet you virtually.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah.
Can we zoom in?
Which, by the way, is different than saying it's virtually nice to meet you. I mean, it's nice to meet you.
Uh-oh, we
What do you
got
got there?
picnic-goated. Is
Nope.
Proboscis in?
Oh, is
No,
it?
He's a different flavor.
I think it's a homalid
Oh
crab.
wow.
What?
Yeah, the crabs
Oh.
with their hind legs in the air.
Really?
Sometimes they
Yeah.
grab onto camouflage like bits of coral and sponge.
Interesting. Oh yeah, and bristly
It's
appendages
quite the
too.
balancing act, though.
Wow.
That is so cool.
I don't know if
Oh,
we've
yeah,
seen
yeah.
very many on this
Well-
expedition so far.
Huh.
Usually they're more common in the lower latitudes.
Its
Is it?
torso looks a lot like a picnic-goated.
It does, kind of. Maybe it's inflated with its brooding. It's got a lot of hairs on its
Yeah,
legs, which is not
Yeah.
typical of picnogonids.
How many legs are there? That's the right number of legs.
Actually, you know what this might be? It might be just a brooding picnogonid. And I think in the picnogonids, the males brood the young.
Oh yeah.
I can't tell. I'm confused now. I'm
No,
going
no.
back
Yeah, I
and
think
forth.
that's like an egg sac,
Yeah,
right?
Steve, now that you say it, you can really see a different color here of the torso itself versus that white mass.
No, I think that's a brood pouch, so it's a picnogonid brooder.
Wow. I've never seen it with such bristly legs.
Yeah, that is weird. Maybe it's just, I don't know.
Huh.
Heavily fouled by something.
I wonder how long they brood for.
We could sit here and wait.
Might be waiting a while.
I don't actually know. I think we might have to send a photo of this out to a specialist because...
You want a better look at it? I can get a little closer.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, zoom out.
You've got the time.
That is so cool. I've never seen the hairs on the legs of a picnogonid before.
Yeah, me neither.
You know, while you guys are sort of settling in to do this, for the students who are watching, I remember I was telling you all that sometimes it isn't always clear cut about what it is we're looking at, and because there's a lot of things, like as you can see here, when you zoom out, you're like, ooh, that's small, and that's where the laser the lasers help us with a scale bar. But even when we zoom in, there's enough kind of convergence in body shapes and body plans that sometimes it's you actually need the real sort of deep knowledgeable experts to clarify what's what. If I were on board, I'd be placing wagers right now, like, you know, betting cookies for who gets this right.
You know, I'm really confused about those hairs because that's not a character you associate with picnogonids. So it looks too regular to be like hydroids or something that have just settled since its last molt.
Yeah, agreed.
That's fascinating.
So we're gonna have to. Or did you stop? You didn't
We
stop.
didn't stop, but we
Yeah,
can
so
if we want to stay here longer. Science, do we want to stay here longer or keep moving? We're gonna end up moving because
yeah,
the ship's
one
moving,
way or
so.
another.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can keep going
Roger.
whenever you're ready. And I think I lost my internet to some of my laptops. I have 2 laptops, but about how far are we to the orangest, highest sloped spot on the high pack contour that we're in right now?
In the contour that we're in,
Arlie, can you zoom past
Yeah.
the arm? You.
we are about, you can see on high pack right now, I think I've got the bright orange spot that you're talking about, unless it's further south of us. The current marker I have is 340 meters.
Okay. Oh gosh. Let's just set up for a transect. Let's just get that going, and then we'll have a few hundred meters before we get to that part. Hopefully we'll find some cool stuff.
Got it. So you like to run a transect starting from here?
Yeah.
Okay, 200 meters.
Let me get centered up here.
Yeah, take your time. Ship's
Yeah,
still
whenever
completing
you're
that
ready.
last
What's
move.
the heading?
It will be 160.
60.
Bridge, Neff?
Lizzie, can you explain what the difference is for the
200
doing a
meters,
transect
bearing
versus
160.
just being?
So it's okay, I think, to still be a little bit to the left, because I think we're going to keep swinging, right?
Oh, okay.
Is that?
Look at the trails on the bottom there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. I guess it's just, well, there must be slope there, right?
That is really like a sand channel or something.
So Lizzie, can you explain what it means to do a transect versus just being an exploratory mode for people that are watching at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been kind of meandering along the seafloor, zooming in and turning to look at interesting rocks and features and corals. But we do quantitative standardized transects, which is where the ROV tries to maintain a fixed altitude above the seafloor. So we're roughly within the screen getting the same area as we're transiting forward. We try to, speed isn't as important as the distance for how we analyze these data.
Ship move is started.
And this gives us a better estimate. It's going to be a kind of a rough estimate of the area that we were able to survey, especially with given the lasers. So we'll make sure that the lasers are on for the transect. And essentially later, we're going to mark the time of when this starts so we can give this video to analysts who are going to be annotating this video and counting and measuring everything over 10 centimeters. So we can estimate the density or abundance of deep sea corals and sponges and note the habitat on top of which they're attached or living within, to get a better idea of really just characterizing the life on the seafloor, versus when we're turning and zooming in, we kind of lose track of the area we've gone, and turning kind of complicates relative the area that we're trying to calculate for these densities or abundances.
Do like you do.
Roger, we're starting transect now.
Oh, thanks, Sam. We've been doing these transects all up and down the West Coast as a part of the West Coast Deep Sea Coral Initiative. So we're also going to be able to roughly compare this site to another site, at least in terms of this is how many of these corals we encountered in a given area. And these are their relative sizes and the habitats they were on top of, so we can do something called a site characterization too. And so we're trying to do these in the same way in every dive location to get a better idea of who's where and why.
That last sentence,
Right? So
Lizzie,
it's
I think captures it really well. It's like that's sort of a standardized way of surveying the seafloor, so you actually have a means of comparing them. And if we just zigzagged around, we would only go to what was shiny and caught our eye. And that's a lot different than being systematic and saying, this is what we encountered along this length and width of a transect. That's cool. Thanks for
Yes,
sharing.
exactly. Trying to sample all the habitats, as much mud as we've seen. Zeros are still data, so we know there aren't any corals here, and we can associate that with a number of environmental variables, which will help feed into predictive models. Because I think a lot of them right now are on presence only,
Yeah,
models, which has limitations.
Looks like the
exactly.
slope's getting much steeper up ahead.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
that's
going to get exciting. Well, we're gonna have to sign off here, folks, in a little bit. But I was hoping I could ask you all for just a few more ideas on how the students. What are some avenues for engagement? The Ocean Exploration Trust, of course, has different internships. But what about NOAA? What are opportunities for students here if they want to be a part of deep sea exploration, both on board ship and off ship?
I think that's a great question for Laura.
Sure. Yeah. So we have lots of different options for interns and volunteers. There's a program with the Cal State universities called the Coast Intern Program, and we have interns that come through that every summer. And this summer, we actually had a student who was with Cal State Channel Islands who ended up creating this really beautiful deep sea coral story map for us. And he had GIS skills and marine biology skills, and he was an undergrad doing that. Now he's applying for graduate school at the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. We have Hollings fellowships. I think those are run through the National Marine Sanctuary. I think my audio might have just cut out and come back again. And Nancy Foster Scholar Fellowships. So if you look up internships, National Marine Sanctuaries, or internships NOAA, you should be able to find some different examples. But all of our sanctuary sites are really enthusiastic about taking on students who want to learn more about sanctuaries and the work we do to protect these amazing environments.
Wow, thank you so much. And you know, I'm just looking at the watch, and first things first, feeling like a whole serious bit of FOMO here right now. I really wish I were out there hanging out with you all. But I also wanted to just remind this, our students who are listening in that, so many of you come from different walks of life and different skill sets, and it really does take those perspectives to make an expedition like this work. And thank you for sharing about the internship and fellowship opportunities. Those are really great ways to be involved with NOAA, and of course there are other ways of getting involved, including reaching out to faculty. So students, of course, if you're interested in the work that my lab does, you can always give me a shout and talk about getting you out to sea with my research group. The Ocean Exploration Trust, of course, has its own internships, but NOAA has some really fantastic opportunities. I'll end by sharing one story about a student last year who happened to be doing a project on hyperspectral imaging, and she approached me and said, I'm doing this work on hyperspectral imaging for corals that are exposed, off the coast of Hawaii, right, for sort of corals right at the sea surface. And it just so happens that I have some funding right now to do work on hyperspectral imaging underwater, which has its strengths and shortcomings. And one thing led to another, and before we knew it, she had an opportunity to work out in Hawaii with NOAA on the sanctuaries out there. And now she's going to be going to sea with us when our expeditions start back up again to be testing some deep water hyperspectral imagers. So just got to ask around and find those opportunities that work for you.
Absolutely. And one thing I always tell students is just be persistent. All of us get so much email, but usually, by the third one, if someone's really persistent and really finds out about the work that we're doing, they've done their research beforehand, that's something that can really help get a leg up and make those connections that you want to make.
I'd also add in that if folks are interested in learning more about roles on Nautilus and all the very different, as Pete mentioned, very different backgrounds that people are coming from to participate in this kind of work, all of our biographical profiles are on the Nautilus Live website on the team page. And then we've also been running a series of events for the last couple months, and we've got a few more coming up that feature many different members of our both at sea and onshore teams this year, featuring we've had, Steve Oskovich as talking about deep water corals. We've had ROV pilots talking about engineering and how they got involved in this line of work. And they're really great kind of 45-minute events that you can now rewatch recorded through our education page on the Nautilus Live page. So a couple different ways to learn more about the roles on board. And as Pete mentioned, we do have internships available in ROV engineering, video engineering, seafloor mapping, and ocean science. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, all of our 2020 internships were deferred to 2021. So we haven't reopened that program yet, but there is more information on our website as well if you're interested in learning more about that program. And echoing everything else that has been offered as advice, persistence really helps, and curiosity and asking lots of questions.
Yeah, you all have been really wonderful to let us sit in and join you on this watch. Thank you. I'm going to be working with Nicole and Megan from OAT because we'll be doing this one more time on one other watch. I'm hoping I can land on your morning watch here, but for now, thank you very much for all that you've shared and for answering so many questions. And we're going to leave you all be now. Have a safe and fun watch, and good luck, and I hope you make some wonderful discoveries.
Thanks. It was really great to have you all, and I appreciate the really informed questions. This was a lot of fun.
Same here, folks. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll catch you all soon. Bye now.
Bye, Pete.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Well, that was a lot of fun.
Did you ever
That was fun.
dive with Pete on the Alvin?
Oh, yeah. Bunch of times. Yep.
What years were you on the Alvin? Were you piloting?
I was on from early 96 to 2001, I think. And then I was on again from 2013 till 2008. I don't know. Anyway, I was there twice. The second time I was the expedition leader.
Nice. I missed you. I was there. I was on the Alvin in 1990 during grad school. Just had one 8-hour dive, but it was one of the most amazing things I've ever done. So
I think I did 120 dives, somewhere there, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it put me in the top 10. It's funny, Alvin has the top 5 have like huge numbers of dives, and then there's this long list of people that have, I don't know, like in the 30s or so. Yeah. You have people either, it's been like 5 years is the usual life of an Alvin pilot. So they burn out.
I was going to say, let's say the usual time,
alive,
career
right?
time. They're still
Yeah, career time. Yeah. Well, it takes about 1.5 years, 2 years to make pilot, and then, they do it for a while, and a lot of them meet scientists and end up married, and I probably know a dozen former Alvin pilots that are married to scientists.
Well, it is kind of a small space in there, so you get
Yeah.
to know people pretty well.
So we're about halfway through that 200-meter transect.
Lizzie, you mentioned that someone's going to look at this video, this transect video later, and identify all the different organisms we see. And I know in some of the shallow water areas, they're using artificial intelligence, like that recognizes species, to do some of that ID work. Is that done in the deep sea at all, or is it just is it always a person doing the analysis?
It's a great question, Laura. So Abby Powell, who is also a watch lead for NA123 and has been throughout different portions of the legs for this 2020 West Coast expedition, she is piloting some machine learning techniques to go through images. I think she's using AUV images right now to test this machine learning algorithm that she's, I'm not sure exactly who she's working with, but I know she's partnering with someone to kind of tweak it. Her preliminary results were just using something she thought would be pretty easily identifiable, which were the fragile pink urchins in the AUV transects. And she's gotten an algorithm down that's like in the 90% accurate. And so I think she's going to start looking at different organisms within those images to start training the algorithm to be able to identify other species. So as far as I know, on the West Coast, she might be one of the few doing that work, but I'm not sure about other regions. But it would make a lot of sense to me to start employing that kind of technology, given the massive amounts of information we're collecting. But I could see how it would be very difficult, given the different angles and how the lighting changes, to have accurate predictions as to what is what within an image. I'd be interested to know if anyone on the Nautilus has also heard of any groups that they've worked with potentially using artificial intelligence or machine learning to identify species within photos in the deep sea.
So all those algorithms, you got to have a really big database of, images for it to work from. So I think that's the big job, is collecting all those images to feed the machine learning algorithm. Right. So it's pretty easy to get a bunch of pictures of cats off of the internet to identify cats, but but more difficult, I would think, to collect images of things on a seafloor that.
Or cats doing science.
Especially because there's a lot of convergent morphologies of things on the seafloor, like, a branching coral is going to look exactly the same as a branching demo sponge.
That would be hard to do.
Yeah.
And then you have, oftentimes the visibility is not so great, so the clarity of the image is a bit lacking.
Erica Frew is chiming in the science chat room, saying that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center is using AI for scallops, and I think the Pacific Fisheries Science Center is using it for baited cameras. So looks like there is some new work that fisheries is doing in that area too.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. So far, I've really only heard about Abby's work, but that's because I'm not quite as deep into this field. I'm more on the surface level of coordinating, so I hear about certain things, but I'm not necessarily informed about the latest and greatest of certain technologies.
How's the weather up there? What's the winds at now?
Thankfully the weather's been dropping off, knock on wood. We were getting pretty gusty overnight and in the morning, but looks like it's now around 18, 19 knots. Last night we were getting gusts of up to 25 knots, and then it would drop off again.
It was very windy last night, I noticed on land.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're hoping weather holds for us, but it sounds like our next dive is going to be a little closer to shore, hoping to get out of that swell and wind.
Yeah, I'm seeing like 6,000 pound swings on the winch tension here, which is pretty wild.
Oh, wow. What's the biggest number you'd want to see on that?
The biggest one I have seen is around 13 or 14,000 pounds, which is kind of
terrifying.
Yeah, the most that we want to see. I mean, it's a big braided steel cable, so it, it is quite strong, but it's kind of shocking when you see it go down, from 6,000 jump up to 13,000 with a big wave. You get some kind of dynamic loading on it, so.
Do you recall roughly how big the swell was to produce that kind of swing?
I think a couple meters. I don't have that, number. Yeah, I usually see like 3 to 4 meters in the delta depth between Herc and Argus with those, so there's change there. So I don't have a perfect number on that, but yeah, 3 to 4 meters probably.
Wow, okay.
The amount of force that swings with the tension increases the deeper we go. So on these deep dives, when there's more cable out, a wave is likely to have a larger swing in that winch tension.
Okay, that makes sense. So it depends on how deep you were when you were getting those readings.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's fascinating. Stuff I've never really known about. I know that the ship has a threshold to where they won't conduct field work in terms of the waves are too large, but that's interesting that it multiplies the deeper you are, which makes sense when you think about it. I just had never thought about it.
I think there's a few factors that would go into kind of limiting operations when there's bad weather. Is the dynamic positioning of the ship itself. So how we make call in these ship moves and steer precisely, kind of maximum limits on that. And then also when we do launch and recovery, we want at least reasonably good weather because we're all working near the side of the ship, so.
Yep, yeah, the threshold is wind speed combined with swell height. So if that's over a certain amount, it's usually about 20 to 25 knots combined wind and swell. That's when we start looking at recovering early. But again, we've seen the wind drop off. It hasn't been consistently high enough. And the dynamic positioning system has been holding. So knock on wood, so far so good.
Yeah, we're a lot shallower now than when we started. So
exactly, that helps too.
Yeah, 1,000 meters makes a big difference, I imagine.
Yeah.
So we've got 13 meters left on this transect. When we finish it, it'll take a little time to have the ship settle out if we want to stop at all, or we can just keep continuing down to 5H. Oh, nope, 5. The next one. Let's zoom out a little further. 5I.
And do we want to follow this contour to 5I, like going south and then east, or go straight over to 5I?
Good question for science.
Oops, I was on mute. Yeah, I think following this contour would be great. I think following the steep slope is our best bet. The waypoints, like I had said, are just suggestions, and if we're going to hope to find rocky or hard habitat, I think this would be our best bet.
Roger. We'll keep moving then.
Thanks. Sounds great. Because I'm looking at HYPACK now. Where is 5i?
5i is now in the bottom right corner. I just zoomed out a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, so we're generally heading in that direction. We're just taking the windy route to follow the contour. Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
Bridge nav.
The scenic route.
Three 0 meters, bearing 160.
Lizzie, what does HYPACK mean for those people who are following at home and may not know that terminology?
Excellent question. So HYPACK, is that the software itself?
Yeah, that's correct. That's the name of the software. Okay. I don't know what it stands for. Let's see if we can look that up.
Yeah, so the software they use essentially that if you're looking at channel 3 or channel 4, which is the quad that has HYPACK in the lower left-hand corner, where channel 3 is just what we call HYPACK. It's the software that they use, but you'll see it's essentially showing us where the ship is, where the 2 ROVs are, and kind of where we're headed. So it has a lot of really helpful and interesting tools to measure distance and bearing or compass direction in terms of where they're going to head and where they want to head. And then underneath, we can map a number of different types of data layer types. So what we're seeing right now is the white lines represent depth, so a bathymetric contour. And so one line represents one depth. So if it curves, you're following that depth contour around a slope or a feature, for example, and contour lines that are closer together mean that that area is steeper because the depth is changing more quickly over space, which is a slope. And the further away they are, it represents like a flatter habitat because you can travel more space before changing your depth. And then we also have on this particular screen a data layer that shows slope, which is represented by this color scheme, where cooler colors, so the blues and purples, represent low slope, and the warmer colors, the orange, the red, represent a higher slope. And so you'll see often where the contour lines are closer together are likely areas of higher slope versus where the lines are wider, you'll see cooler colors that represent lower slope. And so we're using this to determine how and where to transit and what to expect. And so we're looking for areas of higher slope in hopes of finding hard habitat, with the reasoning that the higher the slope, the less likely sediment is to settle and stick to that area. Whereas flat slope, you would expect sediment to pile up. And we're looking for hard habitat.
It looks like we're in a higher slope area now, watching the video. It looks like it's gotten a little bit steeper than it was earlier in the dive.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, so that's exactly what we want. We're looking for those areas of higher slope. Now, just because we're in areas of higher slope, though, doesn't mean that we won't get sediment. We're just trying to increase our chances of finding that harder habitat. So that's what we're following for now.